Hello, everyone. Friday afternoon. Lovely to see you. Chris Green, the history chap. Another ramble through British history, the events that happened in British history this week. And wow, I have got loads for you this week. We're really going to be up against the clock, aren't we, to try and finish it in an hour. So I've got several battles. I've got Everest. What else? We've got the Great Reform Act, riots in London. We've got a fair bit going on this week. Hope you're all very well. Obviously, I was away last week. I was down in France on holiday. Very nice. In Antibes, which is just around the corner from the Gulf de Juan, where Napoleon landed after his exile in Elba. So, we went wandering down there just to see what it was like, which is cool. A bit hot. And obviously that's where he came back from Elba, and that was the Napoleon's 100 days, where he marched tried to seize power in France again, and ended up at the Battle of Waterloo. And the rest, as they say, is history. So anyway, let's see who's on the call this today. Who we got? We got we've got QA Library. We've got Les Browning. Nice to see you. You finally made a live chat. Well, it's lovely to have you here, Les. Great to see you. Jen, I've seen you here, and we saw you yesterday on my talk with the organisation Restless, where I was talking about the Roman invasion of Britain. So Murray, nice to see you from sunny Northamptonshire. I'm going to be mentioning Northamptonshire today, so brace yourself, Murray. Okay. Dina, I guess it is, from New England. Lovely to see you. Sarah Jane, nice to see you too. And Charlie Manson, one of my big supporters. Good afternoon from sunny but chilly Yorkshire. Yeah, do you know what? This morning kicked off really nicely. I went for a run. Anyone would think I was on holiday, drinking lots of wine and eating French food last week, wouldn't you? But there I was. I had a nice run. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And I have to be honest, it's gone pretty lousy this afternoon. I've heard it was potentially spitting with rain up pressure this morning as well. So there you go. Evening all, good to see you all. Yeah, absolutely. Uncle Heavy, great to see you as well. Kieran from Buckinghamshire, great to see you. Danny Evans, Terry Murphy from Cincinnati in the USA. So lovely to have everyone here. I think they've got 48 at the minute on the call. That's good. Sometimes we rise sometimes up to 300 during the hour. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? Cole Rain, good to see you as well. Blimey, we've got everyone now. Now everyone's waking up. Nice to see you all. So anyway, as I say, it's been a holiday last week. D-Day commemorations, of course, this week. I won't dwell too much on it in this live call. I went to a really moving, really good tribute last night, actually, just outside Worcester, a place called Kempsey. And up on Kempsey Common, looking out over the sun setting behind the Malvern Hills behind, there was a celebration, a commemoration of D-Day, including lighting a beacon. We had a lady there singing 1940 songs, which were great. Somewhat worrying, I knew lots of the words. For a moment, Sarah thought it was quite cool, and then I think she started to worry as to why I know words of songs that are nearly 80 years old. But hey, I was singing along. We had a brass band there. There was a beer stall. There was fish and chips. It was a British celebration, and really honouring the men who gave so much on D-Day, especially those who never returned. And of course, I did 2 videos this week because of D-Day. I did Pegasus Bridge, which is been going a real storm, actually, going down a real storm. So check it out if you haven't seen that one. It's the first battle on D-Day, just midnight. These gliders landed by, or 5 gliders landed by 2 crucial bridges on the eastern flank of the D-Day beaches, needed to secure them so that the Germans couldn't bring their panzers across as the lads were landing on the beaches of D-Day. And they achieved that by complete surprise. And these gliders landed almost in the dark, almost next to the bridges, which is just amazing. And, Jim Woolwork, the glider of the pilot of glider number 1, he was 24. I mean, my son's 23. And, well, no disrespect to Jack, but I'd love to see him try to bring down a glider perfectly in the night next to a bridge. And you forget that some of these men were so young. And Major John Howard, who led the attack, he was 31. I mean, Sarah's Sarah's, well, he's not a son-in-law yet, but Sarah's two daughters both got boyfriends, both aged 30, and you think it was a different blinking age, wasn't it? Different age. Great celebrations as well over in Normandy this week. Made you proud of that generation, made you proud to be British as well, for that matter. Oh dear, where are we at? Let's just have a very quick look. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. So let me tell you a few things that have happened in British history this week, because I said earlier we've got a fair bit to crack through. So let's kick off. 1st of June. Yep, 1st of June, 1679. We have the Battle of Drumclog in Scotland. Drumclog is in Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire. So if you're looking at a map of Scotland, if you know Scotland at all, Jen, you'll be with me as you're just across the border in Cumbria. Go up the M6 from England. As you cross the border, it becomes the M74, heading towards Glasgow. And effectively, just you turn off, and if you're heading west off that motorway towards on the A71 towards Kilmarnock, that's where a Drumclog is. Okay. Basically, it was a rising. It was a rebellion in Scotland in 1679. So 1679. This is the time of Charles II on the throne. Charles II of both England and Scotland, king of both countries separately. You've heard that one before in this bit of British history. So this were Covenanters. The Covenanters were, I guess, what you'd call serious, slightly extreme Protestants. Very much of the ilk, the Covenanters and the British parliamentarians had a common cause for most of the English Civil War. Covenanters, for a variety of reasons, felt that they needed to rise in rebellion against Charles II, and they were confronted at this battle by one James Graham, 1st Viscount Dundee, later became famous as Bonnie Dundee. He was loyal to the crown. He was loyal to Charles II. He led the government forces, which defeated the Covenanters at that battle. So reasonably small. Not huge numbers killed. But it is a battle in British history. Interesting, I guess, footnote is that James Graham, Bonnie Dundee, say loyal to the king, then loyal to the king's brother, James II of England, James VII of Scotland, who, of course, was the last Catholic monarch in Britain. And when James was kicked off the throne by his daughter, Mary, and her son-in-law, William, certain Jacobites in England, but principally in Scotland and Ireland, rose in support of James. It wasn't a done deal. The glorious revolution, as it's called, coup d'etat would be another way of describing it, maybe. But and James Graham led the royalist or the loyalist forces in Scotland on behalf of King James, and he actually had scored a massive success over the government forces at the Battle of Killiecrankie. Great name, eh? But the Battle of Killiecrankie. But unfortunately, he was killed in that battle, and the loss of James Graham, Bonnie Dundee, sort of really scuppered. Even though they'd won that battle, really left the Jacobites effectively leaderless in Scotland at that attempt to try and restore James to his throne. So there you go. That was sort of that kicks us off for the day. I bet you didn't see that one coming, did you? Hello to Norway, Grant. Nice to see you. Mike, the disabled Welshman. Good to see you as well as ever. Lionheart, lovely to see you. So let's keep on the 1st of June, moving forward into the Victorian period. 1st of June, 1879, and the Prince Imperial, the French Prince Imperial, is killed during the Zulu Wars. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte was the great nephew of the mighty Napoleon Bonaparte. Not going into loads of French history, which is fascinating. Did a fair bit last week while I was away on holiday there. But Napoleon, that basically the Bonapartes had come back to the throne of France. Obviously, Napoleon had ended up in exile in St. Helena, down in the South Atlantic. But his nephew basically seized power in France in the late 1840s, beginning of the 1850s, had himself crowned emperor, just like his uncle had been. And so we had the Second French Empire in France. Anyway, Franco-Prussian War rocked up in 1870. This Napoleon lost his throne, the Emperor Napoleon III, he was called. He fled, he was given sanctuary in Britain, strangely enough, and they lived in Kent. And Louis Napoleon, his son, who was called the Prince Imperial, which was the title a bit like Prince of Wales in this country, heir to the throne, obviously living in exile now, so not much of an heir to the throne, but definitely a lot of Bonapartists in France hoped that somehow he was the great Bonaparte hope. But anyway, he'd spent some time with the British Army, bit of a weird one. He was a French royal, passed in the British Army. He wanted to go out to Zululand for the Anglo-Zulu Wars, and the British government could see this one coming a mile off. There was absolutely no way on God's earth we were going to let a hot-blooded French royal Bonapartist join the British Army, and something happened to him in France. The French press would absolutely pillory the British for that one. So he was sent off he was allowed to go to Zululand, but very much in a reconnaissance sort of, headquarters staff sort of role. Well, young Napoleon didn't like that, and he went out on a scouting party. Long story short, they got ambushed by some Zulus, and he was killed. And so ended the great, sort of the last big hope, really, of the Bonapartists to ever restore themselves to the throne in France. The dream lived on with other members of the family, but really he was the great hope. Very controversial how he'd been killed. Very controversial that the British officer who was with him had somehow should have taken command, but very hard to take command when you've got a prince in your party who's throwing the orders around as well. So very controversial, as I say. But I've done a video on that one. So if you want to look it up, The Death of the Prince Imperial, or the Prince Imperial, just go on my channel, type in Prince Imperial, and it will come up for you. And speaking of the Zulu Wars, just going to share this one with you. He says, some of you know recently I did Battle of Crete. And how about this as a picture that I got recently? It's done by war artist or military artist Steve Noon. Sorry, I've got Ian Knight. He signed it down there. We've got Ian. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way across my thing. Sorry. We've got Steve signed it, and Ian Knight as well. He's a Zulu historian. So this is the disaster at Calaban, where the British were effectively defeated, or at least a colonial force was defeated by the Zulus. So maybe that's one of the reasons people love the Zulu Wars. It's a good picture, isn't it? Eh? And in fact, I've got a copy, so you never know. I might. I was given a copy as well. I might, I don't know, raffle that off or something. People interested? Drop me a line. Chuck that back over there. Obviously, very daintily done. Right. So, what did we have? Yeah. Okay. So, Prince Imperial. So, let me just say with the 1st of June quickly. 1st of June 1940. Second World War. We focused this week on D-Day, but actually there were several events in the Second World War that happened in this week as well, all of which were actually quite significant. So 1st of June 1940, the Battle of Crete finishes. This is obviously in the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, part of the Greek campaign, where the British had been hoping to support the Greek government as it was being invaded by the Germans. Also, obviously, Churchill saw it as a way of taking the war to the Germans, because by now they were struggling in hang on, 1940, is that correct? I've got 1940, 1st of June 1940. 41. Ooh, great. Can someone just put in there? Some of you guys, I think I've got a wrong date here in my little gens. Put someone, one of my many history buffs. What year did we surrender in Crete? It wasn't 1940. I'm absolutely sure it wasn't. Right, we're going to move on from that. I'll come back to that one, okay? While I quickly look up, I've got myself Battle of Crete. What a prat. 1941. Thank you, Uncle Heavy. Suddenly I realised that there is no way that we could have been losing Crete at the same time as we were trying to sort out Dunkirk. 1941, 1st of June 1941. Okay, the Battle of Crete finishes, and basically a major disaster for the British. Something like they managed to evacuate 18,500 of their troops off the island of Crete, but 12,000 British Commonwealth troops and 5,000 Greek troops had to surrender, taken prisoner by the Germans. In the process, the British had lost somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 killed in the battle, whereas the Germans actually had total casualties of 5,000. So Crete really was the end of the Greek campaign, and another kick in the teeth really for the British. The Germans, it was a parachute landing by the Germans, and a highly successful one. Maybe we should do a story about Crete in the future. Get the year right as well. Excuse me. A bit of water, I think. And let's move on. 2nd of June, 1953. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was crowned at Westminster Abbey. I'm sure some of you might remember that, even if you're very, very young. But what a great reign she had, and what a young woman she was at the time. She was only 26 when she was crowned. It's funny, isn't it? You know, we're talking about those young men in the Second World War just now, and here we have a young woman who then went on to reign, longest reigning monarch in British history. And what a fantastic example she was, and what fantastic service she gave to her country right to the very end. Where are we at? 3rd of June. We'll go back into medieval, but only as a quick touch base. Okay, 3rd of June, 1162. Thomas Becket is ordained Archbishop of Canterbury. He was actually ordained. He'd only just become a priest. It was a political appointment. King Henry II of England basically wanted one of his mates to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. It was a significant role at the time. I mean, it's still pretty significant in this day and age, but at the time, the Archbishops of Canterbury and bishops generally held a lot of political as well as temporal power in England, and obviously he wanted the most important role, Archbishop of Canterbury, filled by one of his friends, Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket was only ordained as a priest shortly before, and I mean almost almost at the last gasp, before being nominated as Archbishop of Canterbury. So at this stage, you could say a complete political appointment. You know, apart from believing in God, he didn't have a track record in the Church of England. Unfortunately for Henry, of course, he was to go native, wasn't he? He was to suddenly decide that actually he would oppose, but mainly because Henry wanted to boss the church around. And he decided, Thomas Becket, new Archbishop of Canterbury, no, the church were not going to be bossed around by his former friend. And as I say, ultimately, you know, as he used the phrase, the rest is history. But ultimately, of course, Becket was assassinated by some knights loyal to King Henry II. And that is where we now have Saint Thomas the Becket. He was this political appointee in the church, suddenly became a hero in the church, and the Pope made him a saint back in the Middle Ages. So there we go. Thomas Becket, 3rd of June 1162, ordained Archbishop of Canterbury. Let me just take a breather for a moment and see what people are putting here in the... Okay, great one. 8th of June 1949, George Orwell publishes 1984. Still a fascinating book. Obviously didn't come true in 1984, but yeah, I don't know if people think we're heading towards a 1984 society, beyond 1984 or not. Good book. George Orwell, not one of my favourite authors. Read that. I've read 1984, read Animal Farm. But that's about it, I think. But 6th of June, 1942, we have the Battle of Midway. Awesome. Obviously, because I'm focusing on British history here, I won't be focusing on the Battle of Midway, but thank you very much. June is a battle month, isn't it? As you can tell, this week is for a start. Nice collection of books behind me. Thank you very much. Do you like that lot there? I bought those wrong way. There. Bought those on eBay recently. That's a history of Britain, but that's, yeah, cracking read. Some of them are a little bit old now, printed in the 1970s. But yeah, that's good. And reading a good one at the minute, The Battle for England, all about the last sort of 60 years of Anglo-Saxon England. That's good as well. Thank you, Uncle Heavy. 1984 was supposed to be a warning, not a how-to manual. Thank you very much. Tickle me there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we got 1359, 7th of June. Robert the Bruce died. Oh, didn't know that. Thank you very much for that one. You're on a roll there. You're racing through. I need you to do my research for me every week. So anyway, let's crack on. We'll say on the 3rd of June very quickly though. The 3rd of June, 1885, the Northwest Rebellion in Canada ends. Not particularly British history, but you could certainly say British Empire history. The Northwest Rebellion actually was a rising by some of the Métis people, and also Cree Native Americans, First Nations as they're called in Canada, and it was really against both English encroachment, or I call it English-speaking encroachment, English Canadians, and going westwards across Canada in their lands, and also encroachment, cultural encroachment. And of course, the Métis were an offshoot from the French Quebec. So a lot of French-speaking Quebec people had a feeling of solidarity for them. Northwest Rebellion broke out. It was led by Louis Riel. Louis Riel, you might have come across, if you remember, in my talk about the Red River Rebellion in the early 1870s. He'd led another rising in the early 1870s, fled to the USA when that failed. Anyway, he was back by popular demand to lead the 1885 rebellion. Had some initial success. Interesting rebellion. This didn't involve any British troops. Red River Rebellion in the early 1870s, Garnet Wolseley himself was there. That's how actually Garnet Wolseley probably made his name in the Red River expedition. This was Canadian versus Canadian in the Northwest Rebellion, and really, I mean, in itself, it's sort of part of the journey of Canada. For the first time, there was a military conflict in Canada, or involving Canada, that they didn't ask for British redcoats to come and assist. The Canadian Army, fledgling Canadian Army, and the Northwest Mounted Police were the main backbone of trying to put down this rebellion, which initially, actually, the rebels had several successes. Several Canadians have asked me to actually do a talk about this Northwest Rebellion, so maybe I should in the future, I'm not sure. But ultimately, on the 3rd of June, the tide turned against them, and they were slowly being chipped away. And on the 3rd of June, some of the Cree forces, the last battle, and it really wasn't a battle, it was more of a skirmish, but the Battle of Lone Lake, and the Cree chief, Big Bear, was basically defeated by the Northwest Mounted Police, contingent of Northwest Mounted Police. Ultimately, they would go on to become part of the Mounties. But the Northwest Mounted Police, interestingly, if you remember from my recent video about General Sir William Butler, General Sir William Butler, a member of Garnet Wolseley's Ashanti Ring, had actually encouraged the formation and advocated the formation of the Northwest Mounted Police. And that was in the early 1870s. And here they are, just over 10 years later, helping putting down the Northwest Rebellion in Canada. Quite a few of the rebels were hanged, and so was Louis Riel. And Louis Riel's still a great hero, almost a martyr, especially in the French-speaking community in Canada. Maybe, yeah, I won't say any more. I'm sure people in Canada will have opinions one way or t'other as to whether he's a martyr and a hero or not. I'll let you have your own opinions and throw your two penneth in. So what have we got here? People, Jen Ingalls asked a question: was June the start of a campaign season? I think you're probably right there, actually, in many respects, despite the fact we've talked about a few Zululand and Second World War. Historically, campaigns took place in the summer months and were very much dictated, by not just the seasons, but also things like harvests as well. So you tend to find there was a key campaign season, if you look in Middle Ages through to English Civil War, of sort of maybe May, certainly June, through to September, maybe rolling into October, and then things quieten down. As a very general rule, not perfect, but think back and stand in their shoes back in those days. When would you gather an army and fight and be able to provision an army as well? All very well rocking up in January. How are you going to feed your army? So there we go. I saw a couple of good questions coming. Oh, Michael Taylor. Thomas Becket, friend of the only English Pope, Nicholas Breakspere. Pope Nicholas, sorry. Yeah, he was Pope Adrian, I seem to remember. But he became Adrian. He was Nicholas Breakspere, but he became Pope Adrian. Okay. Thank you very much, Michael, for supplying that info. Yeah, Nicholas Breakspere. Funny enough, while I was at school in St Albans, because Breakspere came from Hertfordshire, there is a Nicholas Breakspere Catholic school in St Albans. Thank you, QA Library, for sharing some information there. And Lee Davis, another interesting piece. So, folk, if you're not, while you're listening to me, and let's be honest, you may or may not want to listen to me, keep looking in the comments, okay? Because people are posting some really good stuff in there and great tidbits from history. And this is one of the reasons I like to do it. Oh, and Charlie Manson's leapt in there. It's Tom Jones's birthday this week. Well, there you go. It's not unusual. And where else can we go? Passing on from that, 4th of June, back to the Second World War, 4th of June, 1940, Operation Dynamo. The evacuation from Dunkirk ended. During that period, something like 338,000 French and British troops were evacuated from both the harbour and the beaches off Dunkirk, including, of course, 800 small craft, the small vessels who went across the channel to rescue troops. And it's one of those great myths. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to dish things here, but it's one of those great things that the whole of the British Army was evacuated off the beaches by small boats. That's not actually true. The bulk actually were carried off by warships. You could put a hell of a lot more men on a warship than you could on a small craft. But I think it was one of those, it became one of those sort of almost like it happened. 800 small craft did go across there. They did rescue troops. And it was almost symbolic that everyone in Britain was in the war together and everyone could do a bit. It sort of fulfilled a Churchill narrative. And yeah, it's so Operation Dynamo, and I've done a video about that in the past, in my very early days as the history chap. So if you want to look that up as well, I'd like to go back to Dynamo at some stage. Really like to do some about Dynamo, also about the battle at Calais, and indeed the Highland Brigade at Boulogne. And you've got to recognise that there were different things happening. The British Army was saved at Dunkirk by a lot of varying factors, partly because the Germans, with Hitler's support, didn't advance for a while, for the best part of a week. Obviously, because other British troops at places like Calais were being a thorn in the side to the Germans and diverting attention. Also, the French garrison at Lille, 40,000 French troops, the siege at Lille, they were occupying German mines as well. Warships, the RAF played a significant role further away from the beaches. There was always this thing that, the Germans were coming in and attacking the beaches, but the RAF actually put a lot of effort in away from the beaches. And as I say, the small craft. One of the small craft was a boat called the Sundowner. The Sundowner was captained and owned by a chap called Lightoller. Lightoller was the most senior officer on the Titanic, most senior officer who survived on the Titanic. And I think it'd be a great story to tell about him and his career, because he actually he was never given command of a merchant naval vessel after the Titanic. Charles Lightoller did, however, command a boat a Royal Naval boat in the First World War, and actually sank a German U-boat. He rammed a German U-boat with it, which is a fascinating story. And then, of course, back, there he appears in the 1940, taking his little craft. He personally took the little craft over to the beaches of Dunkirk. What an amazing person. What an amazing story. The boat, the Sundowner, is still around. It took part in the Queen's 60th Jubilee pageant on the River Thames. And it also is now, I think it's in dry dock at the minute, being repaired. in Chertsey, somewhere like that, Walton-on-Thames, somewhere like that, up the Thames. But anyway, so it is still around and it's still sort of seaworthy. So there we go. Let's have a quick look here. Cara has said, although Churchill did say that the British should not regard the retreat as a victory, people did. Yeah, and it's there's nothing wrong with that. But you know, and I guess you could argue if they hadn't got the men off the beaches at Dunkirk, what the heck would Britain have done? And how the world could be changed very different today. But it's interesting, an interesting story, Dynamo. We all sort of, yeah, we know men in queues in you know, if you talk to most people about Dunkirk, it's men queuing up in the water, on the beaches, and little craft. And I think actually it's a fascinating story, far more fascinating. And I do find the actual Operation Dynamo, run by Admiral Ramsay, of course, who was then responsible for the D-Day invasions, or Operation Neptune, which was the naval part of D-Day. Yeah, what an incredible bloke he was to have actually organised that evacuation at the drop of a hat. I mean, D-Day was years in the planning. Dynamo, they basically, it was like, you know, the proverbial just hit the fan, and we've got to sort something out. Now we've got to get these men, as many of them, off as we possibly can. And of course, Dynamo, they got more men off than Churchill was hoping they could. So, you know, interesting story. Anyway, waffling there, so let's stop. Uncle Heavy, Dunkirk was the culmination of a heroic failure. Jacob May saying the early war is never talked about enough. No, it probably isn't actually. We tend to focus on the victory bit, don't we? But the early war bit was essential, because actually if you hadn't hung on, there wouldn't have been a victory, probably. And Cara, yeah, I agree with you there, Cara. Again, folks, great conversation going on, and by all means, talk between yourselves there as well. Okay, so where are we at? We've just gone past the half hour, making good progress by my standards. So, okay, 5th of June, a few quickies here, okay. 5th of June, 1913, Emily Davison throws herself in front of the King's horse at the Derby. Emily Davison, suffragette, this was a protest, and she ran out on the course in front of the King's horse, and was mowed down by the King's horse. Well, the King's horse actually fell. It hit her and then fell. And Emily Davison was killed. She was seen very much as sort of almost like a martyr of the suffragette movement. Huge funeral procession in London. And then her coffin went on a train up to Yorkshire, I think it was, that she lived, maybe County Durham, can't remember, but up to the north of England. And again, massive sort of symbolic funeral. You know, she was a hero, martyr to the suffragette cause. Not everyone saw it that way, and many people pointed out that the jockey, who had nothing to do with the suffragette protest, one way or t'other, he'd been brought down. Obviously, the horse went down, and he never rode again. His livelihood was completely knackered, and people did point that out at the time. That, you know, martyrs create other martyrs, or create victims as they produce their martyrdom. Interesting, isn't it? Right? How history turns. So, okay, staying on the 5th of June, 1929, Ramsay MacDonald becomes Prime Minister for the second time. Ramsay MacDonald, first ever Labour Prime Minister in the early 20s. In 1929, he was invited to form, in the wake of the Wall Street crash, Labour won, or was the largest party in Parliament after a general election, and the King George V, invited Ramsay MacDonald to be Prime Minister again. Eventually, because he tried to introduce what we would now call austerity, a large part of the Labour Party, his own party, turned their back on him, and he only survived in office with the support of the Conservatives. They formed, in the early 1930s, formed a national government, supposedly a government of national unity. Fundamentally, it was the rump of the Labour Party around Ramsay MacDonald and the Conservative Party under Stanley Baldwin, and a few National Liberals were in there as well. But yeah, anyway, that's Stanley Baldwin, and really because of both the austerity and then getting into bed with the Conservatives, Ramsay MacDonald became like a pariah in the Labour Party and the Labour movement. And the Labour Party sort of went on its own way, and then with these few national government people supporting Ramsay MacDonald. Ramsay MacDonald ultimately was replaced by Conservative Stanley Baldwin. And last but not least, on the 5th of, and speaking politics, 5th of June, 1975. Do you know what's coming next? The United Kingdom voted in a referendum to join the EEC, European Economic Community. 67% of the vote, popular vote, said, yes, let's join the EEC. Obviously, fast forward, just a few years ago, another referendum voted to leave what had now become the EEC, had transformed into the European Union, the EU, and by the slenderest of margins, but nevertheless a democratic vote, the British public decided to leave that EU. So there you go. Before I'm gonna click on two more quickies, and then I'm gonna see what's going on in the chat. Okay, 6th of June, 1844, the YMCA, Young Man's Christian Association, was formed in London. Strangely enough, and 100 years later, 6th of June, 1944. We've heard it all so far. D-Day. Okay, so if you haven't checked out my videos on D-Day, Pegasus Bridge, and also the video I did, a bit of a vanity one, I just thought it was an interesting one. Didn't expect to get lots of views on YouTube, and I've been proved right. But all about the weathermen, or the weather forecasters, and the role they played in D-Day, because I found that fascinating. Not just the role they played, but also when Group Captain Stagg, the chief meteorologist, came to Eisenhower second time round, had already postponed. Eisenhower had already postponed D-Day once, and he basically said, well, Stagg basically said, I think there might be a window of opportunity in the weather, night of the 5th day of the 6th of June. And Eisenhower basically said, so, well, how confident are you that there's going to be this break in the weather? And Stagg said, the best I can give you is 50-50. And Eisenhower turned around, he looked out the window, thought for a moment, and then he turned and said, okay, we'll go. And I just think, we all think we have hard decisions in life, and many of us probably do have hard decisions in life. But can you imagine just what must have been going through Eisenhower's head when he'd been told there's a potential break, otherwise we're going to have to postpone D-Day again. You've got a choice, but it's 50-50. Got the right call, didn't he? But, history, we're very quick to criticise anyone who made the wrong call, aren't we? But he made the right call. But, God, I bet there must have been a call and a half to sit there and think, I'm going to send all these young lads. We don't know if the weather's, it's bad enough that the Germans are waiting for them. There's going to be men killed on D-Day. There were men killed on D-Day. 4,500 were killed on D-Day. Another 5,500 were injured. Not least, obviously, Omaha being the worst beach, but by no means the only place that we took casualties. The Allies took casualties on D-Day. So 10,000 casualties from the Germans, but there was the potential that we could have a storm in the middle of the channel, trying to land men in a storm. God knows how many would go under in landing craft and everything else. Winds blowing the parachute, the airborne troops all over the place, even worse than actually happened on D-Day. All of that must have gone through his head. I could be sanctioning a complete and utter disaster. 50-50, and he went for it. Interesting. So let me just have a very quick look here. Let's have a very quick look. In the Labour Party clubs, the photo of Ramsay MacDonald is turned towards the wall, even now. Murray, fascinating. Thank you very much for that. Labour history is an interesting, I don't mean Labour Party, I mean history of the Labour movement is interesting, just because actually it probably affects a lot more of us than actually the history of royalty does. But history of royalty is just, people just like it a lot more. There's a lot more colour. Probably some more colourful characters. Probably actually behaved a lot worse than most working class people did as well, actually. Kerry Library, the WYCA. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that one. Cara, enjoyed that. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for watching the weather on D-Day video. That's good of you. Thank you. And Jen enjoyed it as well. So thank you very much. Kieran, Evacuation of British troops from Norway completed in early June 1940. Funny enough, I was going to mention that. I might as well mention it now for you, Kieran. Yeah, the Norwegian troops, the end of the Narvik campaign, another disaster at the time. Yeah, they were for the end of the Narvik campaign, Norwegian campaign for the British was, or British and French actually, was on the 8th of June 1940. Had that one. Definitely not. That's definitely 1940, everyone. Okay. So actually, when you think about it, you know, we had the Dynamo, the evacuation of the British and French from Dunkirk had finished on the 4th of June. And by the 8th of June, the British were, having to hightail it out of Norway as well. You know, beginning of June, and Churchill took on the poison chalice of being wartime prime minister right in front of all of this. Interesting. There you go. So what else have we got here? QA Library. Eisenhower did write a resignation letter if D-Day went wrong. And it went up for sale a few years ago. Yeah, he kept it in his pocket, never had to use it. And he discovered it a few weeks later. we all have pockets in coats like that, don't we? Where we find, oh, that's the receipt I've been looking for, or the program, or our daughter's graduation ceremony, whatever it might be. And yeah, and he found his resignation letter. And you're right, it has been auctioned subsequently, but put up for sale subsequently. So yeah, yeah, he was that close. He knew it could go horribly, horribly wrong, and it could have gone wrong. In fairness, without any adverse weather effects. You know, if Hitler had woken up or been woken up and told, in particular, von Luck's panzers, the 21st Panzer Division, to move forward at 3 a.m. like von Luck wanted to, von Luck would have taken out, or would probably have, with the 21st Panzers, would probably have gone straight through the British airborne landings at Pegasus Bridge and Ronville next door, and would have been, nearest damn it, waiting on the beaches for the Allied troops to come in at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I wonder what would have happened then. Lots of ifs and buts, of course. Appreciate, and we always tend to go down the worst scenario. It could have been that the naval, as they came forward, they could have been actually decimated in the naval bombardment that started just before D-Day as well. So who knows? Von Luck might have had no panzers by the end of D-Day. We don't tend to think of that scenario, do we? Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Charlie. Left wing, right wing. Thank you. Good story there. There was a play about Stag and the D-Day decision. Yeah, there was a play. I never saw it. I'm aware of it, though. Thank you. And mustn't forget Juan Garcia Cara. Yeah, he was. He was Garbo. Was his? He was like a double agent, wasn't he? A double agent, and he was crucial in the deceptions of D-Day. And Garbo, I seem to remember there was a book by McIntyre, I've forgotten his name, journalist, wrote a book recently called Double Cross, which is a really good book. I've read it. I haven't got it in my collection. I think my mum has it. But and that's all about the double agents and the espionage that was put in place before D-Day. Huge amount of espionage in place, including a dummy army actually established in East Anglia, which in theory was going to go to either the Netherlands, Belgium area, or maybe, you know, and they did some similar stuff up in Scotland. The king went all the way up to Scotland to meet his troops and wish them farewell right in front of D-Day, giving you the impression that there was going to be some sort of naval or indeed landing in Norway again. So, you know, as a project, D-Day is, there were so many moving parts, all of which could have gone wrong at different stages. But, you know, we haven't even talked about things like Pluto, the supply line, the Mulberry Harbours. You know, it goes on and on. The work that was done with SOE and with the French resistance in creating as much mayhem as possible behind German lines in the advance of D-Day, knackering up all the different communications places. You know, you actually look at all of it and you just think, how the hell did they actually pull it all together, let alone do all the individual bits? You know, I've worked for a few companies who have some complex projects on the go, but nothing like this. D-Day. D-Day's got to be the masterclass in any project management, surely. Ben McIntyre, thank you very much indeed for people putting that one in. So I'm on no retainer here for Ben McIntyre or Amazon or anyone else, but Double Cross, great book to read, as indeed was Ben McIntyre's other one, Operation Mincemeat, of course, all about prior to the deceptions prior to the Sicily landings as well. What ifs would be a great thing to do on one of these calls one day, wouldn't it? Okay. But not today, because I want to crack on. 7th of, very quick one, 7th of June, 1672, the Battle of Southwold. Another battle in June. But this was actually the first battle in the Third Anglo-Dutch War. Yeah, we've had a few wars with the Dutch. The Dutch were Britain's, or England's in particular, main maritime rival in the 1600s, late from even in Cromwell's time. They crossed swords, fellow Protestant nations. But this was by now, again, 1672. This is in the reign of Charles II once more. A British fleet, Royal Navy fleet, under his brother, the Duke of York, later King James, who we talked about in the very first battle, very first date here. James II of England, 7th of Scotland. This was a battle just off Southwold off the coast of Suffolk, East Anglia. And this was James, Duke of York, versus the Dutch under de Ruyter, was the Dutch admiral in charge. And basically the Dutch were outnumbered by the Royal Navy, and they still managed to win the battle. An outnumbered Dutch Navy managed to sink 4 Royal Naval ships for the loss of only 1 of their own. So definitely classified as a Dutch victory. Moving on, not because I don't want to dwell on Dutch victories, but I've just got a couple of other really good ones I want to talk about before we hit the top of the hour, if I possibly can. 7th of June, 1780, just 8 years later. 7th of June, 100 years later. 7th of June, 1780, the Gordon Riots. You might have heard of the Gordon Riots. I don't know if anyone's heard of the Gordon Riots. It's one of those ones people have heard of and haven't got a clue what they're actually about, a bit like the Wars of the Roses. The Gordon Riots were actually an anti-Catholic riots in London. Catholics had been effectively suppressed ever since the Gunpowder Plot, really, and certainly through Cromwell's time in charge of Britain. And in 1778, Parliament tentatively tried to maybe loosen the things for Catholics, that they could have churches, for instance. Okay, 1778, it was called the Papist Act. It allowed people to be Catholic. They weren't allowed to join the army, or at least not allowed to become officers in the army, and couldn't enter Parliament, couldn't get a university degree. But if you want to call yourself a Catholic, you could. Well, for a lot of Protestants in Britain, even that was too much. Not least a man called Lord George Gordon. Lord George Gordon led a protest movement against the Catholics. Even the small amount of, I wouldn't even call it emancipation at this stage, but even this small amount of tentative moving forward to equal rights for Catholics was too much. Gordon organised a petition, which he brought to Parliament. He brought it with a crowd, mass march that would present a petition to Parliament. It's happened since Chartists and people like that. But Gordon rocked up in London on the 7th of June, 1780, with 40 to 60,000 supporters. There was this mass march towards the House of Commons. Gordon went into the House of Commons to present his petition, and meanwhile, 40 to 60,000 people outside, well, basically took matters into their own hands. Anything that they thought vaguely smelt of Catholicism, or anyone supporting Catholicism, basically was fair game. And in the ensuing riots that got out of hand, the Lord North, the Prime Minister, hadn't actually bothered calling out any special constables, even though there was a protest march of 40 to 60,000 people through the streets of London. And they proceeded to go on a rampage. They rampaged through Moorfields area of London, which at the time had a very heavy Irish population. So Irish houses, Catholic churches were being burnt down, set on fire. But like all riots, not that I support riots, but they start off with some sort of focus, and they rapidly go out of control, don't they? And so, funny enough, they were now attacking Newgate Prison because, well, why wouldn't you? And also the Clink Prison across the river in Southwark. And then they turned their attention to the Bank of England. And this was a step too far. Basically, the Newgate prison was set on fire. It was burnt down. Clink was burnt down in Southwark. And they basically wanted to do exactly the same, set fire and burn down the Bank of England. Finally, Lord North, the Prime Minister, called out regular troops and they proceeded to fire on the demonstrators. Something like 250 demonstrators, rioters, were killed and a similar number injured. Something like 450 were then arrested. Several were hanged. And the Gordon Riots, the most deadly riots and the most destructive riots in London's history to date. Interestingly, more property was destroyed in the Gordon Riots in London in 1780 than was destroyed in the riots that led to the French Revolution in Paris just 9 years later. It was significant. Gordon himself was, he was let off, he claimed parliamentary privilege because he was a member of Parliament. He claimed parliamentary privilege and he was later, however, convicted of libel. Nothing to do with the Gordon Riots, libel, and he ended up, ironically, in the newly rebuilt and refurbished Newgate prison, where he died. He lived in some style there, but he never came out of prison and died there. How about that one? 7th of June 1832, the Great Reform Act was passed, called the Great Reform Act. Arguably not that great in this respect. It did increase the franchise. From 400,000 people to something like 650,000 people, all men, property owners. So as far as a massive step forward for democracy, it was definitely a step forward. Was it massive? Yeah, probably not. If you were working class at the time, you wouldn't have thought so. Its biggest reform was that it did away, it basically redistributed seats. It did away with a whole lot of things called rotten boroughs. Rotten boroughs, cracking thing. These were boroughs that have been allowed to send people to Parliament since medieval times, okay, regardless of what has happened to those towns since then. So here's the classic. Back in medieval times, Dunwich in Suffolk, Dunwich in Suffolk was a major trading port, valuable trading port, wealthy, deserved a member of Parliament. In the meantime, most of it had fallen into the sea. In fact, by 1832, if I get my figures right here, and I will just pop down because it's the sort of thing people will have a go at me for, it had 32 voters. It was still sending a member of Parliament. Interestingly, at this time, the big industrial centres that were now growing, because we were into the Industrial Revolution, Birmingham had no representation in Parliament. Manchester, Leeds, Nottingham. These were places where there was virtually no representation at all. And you had places like Dunwich, medieval ghost town, 32 voters, still sending a member of Parliament. The best one of the lot was a place called Old Sarum. Old Sarum, just outside Salisbury in Wiltshire, had 7 voters. They could return a member of Parliament. Birmingham, big industrial city, had nothing. So the Great Reform Act of 1832 changed all of that, did away with rotten boroughs and started to give representation to the ability for those towns, to like Birmingham, to have members of Parliament for the first time. Don't forget, still you had to be a property owner. It wasn't working class. Women definitely didn't have the vote, but it was a step forward in that perspective. The bigger challenge, or the bigger reform for working class people to be able to vote, ironically, was introduced by the Conservatives under Disraeli in the late 1860s, where the franchise was moved in to working class men, not all of them, and still not women. British democracy took a long time to get to where we are now. Interesting though, really a whole interesting thing, the Great Reform Act. Basically, the House of Lords were blocking it, didn't want it to happen. The Prime Minister, Lord Grey, went to the King William IV, Queen Victoria's uncle, basically said, well, look, if the House of Lords are blocking it, I want 50 Whig, this is what he was, the precursors to the Liberal Party, I want to be able to create 50 new Whig peers to put in there, and we'll outvote the Tories in the House of Lords. And it was with that threat. The king didn't want to do that. He tried to get the Duke of Wellington to form a government instead. Duke of Wellington couldn't form a government, didn't have enough support in the House of Commons. King had to then come back, recall Lord Grey. And basically he said to the House of Lords, I'm now going to back Lord Grey. If you don't vote this bill through that's passed the House of Commons 3 times, I will create those 50 Whig Lords. And where the Tory Lords decided they'd let it through. So fascinating bit there. Maybe we want to do a talk on at another stage, but hardly military, is it? So the last two, very quick last military style one, 8th of June, 1607, the Newton Rebellion, also called the Midland Rebellion and subsequent massacre. Basically, this was in the reign of King James I of England, and these were peasants, basically rebelling because of enclosures. Common land was being enclosed, and they were obviously being forced off the land, being forced to work for other people, not being able to graze their cows and things on land they'd already historically been able to graze on. And they are basically huge protests led by a man called John Reynolds, also known as Captain Pouch, because he carried a little pouch. And he basically said to his followers that inside his pouch was almost like a magic potion, that they would not come to harm if they were charged by horses or shot at by militias. And interestingly, the local trained bands in this is Northamptonshire, by the way. Sorry, someone was from Northampton earlier. This was just outside Kettering, Newton, just outside Kettering in Northamptonshire. Basically, the local landowners armed themselves. The local trained bands refused to come out and support them, stayed neutral. So the local landowners armed their own supporters and attacked John Reynolds and his crowd at Newton outside Kettering on the 8th of June, 1607. Killed about 40, something like that. And quite a few were hanged afterwards, including John Reynolds. And funny enough, inside his pouch was no magic potion, but supposedly a piece of old cheese that was going green. There you go. We all like to follow someone somewhere, don't we? Last story for this week. But before I do the last story for this week, where are we all getting to? Thank you, QA Library. And Charlie Manson, yeah, there was the great fears about Catholicism in right up to into the early 19th century in Britain. Lionheart, it sounds like Kett's rebellion. Yes, possibly. I've seen it described as the last real rebellion of peasants versus landed classes in Britain as a statement. Not sure if that's true, but maybe. Pitchfork Rebellion. Do you know there are some really good rebellion stories, aren't there? So we've got the Pitchfork Rebellion, we've got Kett's Rebellion, we've got the Western Rebellion. Well, we've obviously got this one here, the Midland Rebellion or Newton Rebellion. We also have things like Peterloo. I think Jen, you've asked if I could do a story about Peterloo, the Newport Rising. We had the Pentridge Rebellion, Pentridge Rebellion in Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire. So there's quite a few. There's one down in Kent in the late 1830s as well. Can't remember the guy, but he's in Ian Knight's book, Warriors in Scarlet. Oh, you can't see it there. It's on the one there. But any of you fancy that one? Warriors in Scarlet by Ian Knight. Good book, really good read. And he actually talks. The very first one is the Battle of Bossenden Wood in Kent, where again another person, sort of pseudo-religious-y leader, was trying to incite local folk in rebellion. So chuck that up there. Which takes me to last thing of today, and it actually is in the thumbnail. So gotta say it, isn't it? 8th of June, 1924. Mountaineers George Mallory and Andrew Irvine are last seen ascending into some clouds 250 meters below the summit of Everest. They were never seen alive again, and to this day, no one knows if they summited Everest 30 years before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay did in 1953. 1924, I won't go into it in too much detail. Could do. I've done. Do you know, it's one of my very first public talks I ever did. Not like as the history chap. Just, you know, I had to do a public talk. You know, as speaking in public, and I did it about this. And people said, "Are you a mountaineer?" Because you spoke with so much passion about it. Yeah, just interesting subject. But basically, the 1924 Everest expedition was a serious attempt. There were actually 3 attempts in this British expedition to Everest. The first really didn't do very much. The second bit had gone very close to the nearly as high as Mallory and Irvine had got. And then the third time, George Mallory and his climbing partner, Andrew Irvine from Birkenhead and Mallory from Cheshire. So interesting little northwest combination there, combo. So climbed, last seen climbing into some cloud. They below, just 250 meters below the summit. And as I say, no one knows what happened. Well, they found the bodies. There was, you know, they died because they didn't come down. No one knows if they ever summited Everest. Interestingly, Mallory's body was found in 1999. They found Mallory's body, a broken leg and a hole in his forehead, like a hole in his skull. So he'd obviously fallen. They reckon there was some of his body was still there because of the altitude. So it wasn't just a skeleton. There were chaffing on his ropes. It looked like they had fallen. But with a broken leg and just one hole in his head from hitting a stone, possibly hadn't fallen far, but may have been unconscious. And if you're unconscious on the top of Everest, that's a death sentence, isn't it? No one knows no one's found. Andrew Irvine's body has been sighted in the past, but never found. 2 crucial and interesting pieces of evidence, one of which, well, both of which are lacking. They took a camera with them. That camera has never been found. They were going to take a photo from the top of Everest, but they've never found the camera. And the other interesting bit was on Mallory's body. And as I say, it hadn't decayed because of the cold up there. In his inside pocket on the whole expedition, he carried a picture of his wife, Ruth, and he was going to place it on the summit when they reached it. And when they searched through his clothes in 1999, they could not find that picture of Ruth. Had it blown away? Or had it been placed on the summit of Everest? No one ever knows. It's one of the great mysteries of mountaineering, and you know, a lot of mountaineers have very strong views either way as to what happened. Officially, Everest was summited on the 29th of May 1953. Say New Zealander Edmund Hillary and local Nepalese Tenzing Norgay, very often known as Sherpa Tenzing, summited Everest, and the news was in the papers on Queen Elizabeth's on the morning papers of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation on the 2nd of June 1953. Incredible, hey? Coronation Day, and just heard that the highest mountain in the world had officially been summited. So Kara, they found Mallory's body though, so the assumption is that he summited and fell trying to get down. That's one assumption, Kara. The jury's out. You talk to people in the mountaineering community; they're all over the show on this one. Just as easy that they could have fallen whilst in the cloud, still going for the summit. No one knows. They certainly know that their oxygen tanks they found their oxygen tanks below, so they definitely were climbing without oxygen at this stage. So we genuinely, Cara, no one knows. I'm in my mind, jury out. A little bit like Loch Ness Monster. Be lovely if it was true, but maybe actually part of the fun is just not knowing as well. Tenzing Norgay, that's right. Thank you very much. Interesting thing, by the way, George Mallory, his younger brother was Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Mallory of RAF fame, Second World War, including D-Day, of course, in charge of the aerial assault on D-Day. So that brings us full circle to where I was at the beginning of the talk. D-Day has been this week, and we end up from the slopes of Everest. We still have a D-Day connection with George Mallory's younger brother, commanding the one and only Sir Trafford Lee Mallory of Big Wing, Battle of Britain fame, and the aerial assault on Operation Overlord, D-Day. So there you go, folks. I hope you've enjoyed that little trip through British history this week. It's I told you we had a lot. I told you it was pretty varied as well. Let's just have a quick look before I clear off. We all believe what we want to believe. And Cara, you know, I think one of the lovely things about those sort of mysteries is there's a bit of it which actually, it'd be a shame if we found out, wouldn't it? Because in fairness, you know, it would take away from Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. But equally, we don't really want to know they didn't do it. Yeah, it's one of those ones. What ifs? You know, it's a bit like, you know, King Arthur, did he exist or not? And then to find out that it definitely didn't happen. We all like those things. All those sort of, you know, did the princes in the Tower escape? Did, you know, from Richard III, or did Richard III spirit them out of the country for their own protection? Who knows? Maybe we should do some what ifs sometime on here. What do people think? So, just as a matter of interest, if I was to go into any of those subjects we've covered, and hell, we've covered a lot today. If I was to do a video about one of those in the future, sort of a 15-minute one, proper YouTube video, any particular ones that you would vote for? Throwing it in there. So, I mean, if we just look back at what I've got up there, I've actually put my notes up on the screen up here today. It's not on a screen, it's on a picture. So obviously we won't do the Prince Imperial because we've done him before, but we've got Bonnie Dundee and the Jacobites in Scotland. We have the Battle of Crete in the Second World War, Northwest Rebellion in Canada, Operation Dynamo, Dunkirk evacuation. We've got Gordon Riots in London, the Gordon Riots, Great Reform Act. Yeah, maybe some of those variety of those weird rebellions have taken place in English history, like the Newton Rebellion that I talked about earlier, or maybe even something like Mallory and Irvine. And as a nod, we also have the Narvik campaign in Norway, the Norwegian campaign in 1940. And of course, it was because that was going so badly that Chamberlain was forced to step down, and there was a vacancy for Prime Minister. And we all know who filled that vacancy, don't we? So Charlie Manson's thrown a vote in there for the Northwest Rebellion. Cara's gone for the Gordon Riots. One of the things I love here is when I throw these votes open, it's complete anarchy. Hang on, Declan. The twins in the Tower of London will be interesting. Interesting. Ian McKee's gone for the Gordon Riots. Tree Goblin, no one mentioned in my kids' schools D-Day this week. Surprising, because I think most schools that I know of and most teachers I know of definitely were doing stuff. And last night there were kids there reading poems that D-Day at Kempsey in Worcester. So yeah, it's, Crete Dynamo would be good. Crete, someone else is putting in. Oh, Crete. Oh, Charlie Manson. Because what were you going for earlier? The Northwest campaign, Northwest thing. Was that you, Charlie? Yeah, Northwest Rank. Someone else has gone Crete. Any of them, says Uncle Heavy. God, you sound like some of the politicians in this general election that we've got going on in Britain. Yeah, if that's what you want, I'll give it to you. What about a video on Sir Adrian Carton de Wyatt? Well, you mean this Sir Adrian Carton de Wyatt? He's on my hit list. Yeah, the general they couldn't kill. A phenomenal story. Hard as nails. First World War, well, Boer War, First World War, Second World War, and ends up, yeah, it was all over. Oh, with a quick bit of the Polish-Russian War in the 1920s as well. Yeah, interesting bloke. He's on my list. Okay, Operation Mincemeat. Someone else has said. Oh, thank you. Norwegian campaign. All of them. I just want them all, Chris, says Charlie. Look, watch this space. I love, as you well know, love doing these videos. Love doing these live talks, but love doing the videos as well on YouTube. It does take a little bit of time because I like to try and get them right, try and get some good visuals for you as well. Uncle Heavy's just said, have I done a video on George Orwell? No, I haven't. Interesting. My problem, I need a 25-hour day and an 8-day week, and then I could add another 100 years of life, and I would be able to tell you the stories of all the things that I'd love to tell you about. But thank you very much indeed, everyone, for your support today. Thank you, everyone, for your support. So whether you're patrons, members of my members channel here, whether you just watch my videos, thank you very much, and indeed listen to my podcasts. And those of you who are on my mailing list as well, you get my weekly updates, my history newsletter. You can get that at my website, thehistorychap.com. But thank you very much indeed. Have a good weekend, everyone. I'm actually delivering a talk to the Friends of the Mercian Regiment Museum tomorrow here in Worcester. Actually doing a one on, I think it's Dad's Army. Yes, in fact, it is Dad's Army. I don't know why I'm thinking about it. And I'm doing 2 more talks next week up in Cheshire. So we're doing a history of pantomime. Oh, yes, it is. And also the history of coronations, British or English coronations. So definitely no war stuff in there. Apart from, and actually, funny enough, Dad's Army, by the way, folks, maybe I should do a video about the real Home Guard. I don't mean Dad's Army. I mean, what were the Home Guard all about? How many Home Guard actually died in the Second World War? Okay. When did they start? When did they finish? How many people were involved in them? Yeah. Because most of us only know the Home Guard from Dad's Army and see it as a bit of a joke, really. But they were serious, and I think they would have put their lives down, or most of them would have put their lives down if Britain had been invaded. Might not have wanted to put their lives down, but they were there. They were going to do it. So yeah, maybe the Home Guard is not a bad video to do at some stage as well. Obviously, don't want to just repeat things that Mark Felton does on his channel. And likewise, in the 19th century stuff, don't just want to repeat stuff that Chris Parkinson does on Redcoat military history. But I think there's probably room for most of us. Anyway, folks, have a great weekend. Lovely being back in action with you guys after being on holiday. And I look forward to seeing you, well, next week, the same time, same place, but also a couple of videos, or at least one video coming out next week as well. So have a great time. Don't forget Pegasus Bridge, D-Day Weathermen, or the Prince Imperial. Take your pick. They're all there waiting for you. Thanks very much indeed.